All right, everyone, the red light is on and we are recording. This is Mark back for another episode of the Veteran Semi-Professional. So today's an interview episode where I'm interviewing a veteran about their life and career after the military. All an effort to help you if you're trying to figure out, what do I do once I can put my hands back in my pockets, grow out my hair, and start wearing these things called civilian clothes? This is the show for you. Okay. I talk to people about, their personal story, the good, bad, and the ugly in their transition process, the career path they took and how you can kind of get started on that if it's of interest to you. And they just talk about, useful frameworks, tools, thought processes, all to help you and your family have a successful and fulfilling life after the uniform. So super pumped for today's guest. We have a pretty wide range set of things to talk about today. So Jordan, if you could take a minute and introduce yourself, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, Mark, thanks for having me on the show. So my name's Jordan Blashek. I was a Marine infantry officer, did 5 years in the Corps. I was part of 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines, did 2 tours overseas, first with 3-1 on a Marine Expeditionary Unit off of Yemen, Somalia. And second, I was an advisor to the Afghan National Army, embedded as a combat advisor. So did my 5 years, got out in 2014, and went to grad school, did a couple years of law school, and then joined the private sector. And I've been working in the private sector the last 5 years or so. Before that, grew up in Los Angeles, live in Austin, Texas today. And very excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, Austin is a fantastic town. I have not been able to visit LA yet. Actually, I've never been out there. Lots of other cities in California that I've been to, but I haven't been to LA yet. But on the bucket list for sure.
Yeah, it's a good bucket list. LA is a nice town, but I've been living in Austin now for four months, and I have to say it's the best place I've ever lived. It's a great city.
It really is. Austin is an awesome town every which way. Okay, well, cool, man. Well, first let's talk about that transition from Marines. Okay. And I want to know, what went well? What were some things if you could go back, maybe you might try and do over again or change or whatever. Just kind of talk to me through what you were going through and what were some stumbling blocks that you might want to point out for people coming in behind you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I loved the Marine Corps. I had such a good time, and it was something that I always knew I wanted to do 4 to 5 years, and then I was going to get out. And so it was never it's never a question. There were moments when I thought I can do this forever, but the 4-year mark hit, and I was ready to move on to the next phase of life. And so I had thought through it a lot in advance, like, what do I want to do? And decided that I wanted to go to grad school. I had the GI Bill, paid for it. So why not take up the government on that, free money? So way in advance of getting out, I applied to grad school. So I knew what I was going to do. I got out around July 2014. I had like 6 weeks before school started. So I just traveled around the world. It was a great way to decompress and kind of unwind from the military, time in the military. I show up at school, in August 2014, and honestly,
and sorry, I'm just going to jump in real quick. And what was the program? Like, what was the grad school you were going to?
Yeah, so I was going to law school. I was going to law school. So I had applied while I was still in the Marines, and show up August 2014, and I'm surrounded by like 22-year-olds, 23-year-olds.
Yeah.
And I remember those first couple months as everybody's like, either trying to like make friends or, eyeball each other, like who's my competition here. And my first thought was like, I'm not ready for this. Like this is not what I want. And I had a visceral reaction against it. And so, I kind of went into the whole process thinking like, I've already got school set. I know what I'm doing. I have a plan. And I was surprised by how hard it ended up being actually executing the plan. Everything from, feeling like I was missing my old Marines, missing the uniform. I had no sense of purpose. Didn't really know why, I was in school at that point. It was hard for me to motivate myself to go to class. The whole sense of identity I had as a Marine was now gone. And so I found it to be way more disorienting than I expected, and probably went up and down in terms of feeling depressed a little bit, feeling like I wasn't sure what path I was on. And so that first year was hard. And I say all of that just because like I had everything figured out. I had a plan. I was going to Yale Law School. It's the top law school in the country. And still it was surprising to me how difficult that transition was the first year. And it's something that I've heard reflected from all of my friends who got out, that first year is really tough because the entire identity you built for yourself in the military is now gone. And you have to figure out who you are without that identity. And it's a powerful one, especially no offense to the other services, but the Marine Corps is like, that identity is super strong. And you just wish you were still with it. I found myself like almost looking for Marines, hoping I could find someone I could go talk to. And so anyway, that's really what the first year experience was for me. And slowly that faded. So whatever chip on my shoulder I had, whatever sense of rootlessness slowly faded over time. And as I dived deeper into what I was learning and all the resources at Yale University, I started to find my footing, and I found people that I actually really liked. There were a whole bunch of other veterans on campus that I started to hang out with. And I got involved in some cool things. So, it was right around the 2016 election. And so, I started advising some of the political campaigns on military policy and national security policy. And so all that kind of stuff started to give me a sense of, okay, I actually have experience from the military that can now translate into the real world, be useful to somebody. And after that first year, I really started to pick up like, okay, I think I now see a path to what I want to do out of the military.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of good stuff for us to unpack in there. And the first one I want to highlight on is that gap in between the Marines and starting school. You said it was about like 6 weeks or so. And, I say this all the time on the show to anyone that I ever talk to. Like I usually hear one of two narratives is on one story, someone gets out of the Marines on a Friday and starts at, a new job or school on a Monday. And every time they regret that. They're like, it was too much too soon. I needed some time to decompress. And then I hear someone who, like you took some time off, a couple weeks, couple months, whatever. And they're like, man, I needed that. Like I needed that separation to just like take a knee, pause and reflect. So if you listen to this show as a regular listener, like you hear me say that every single time that this comes up, because I think it's really, really important because you kind of get like one shot at that. And so it's important to plan it and think about it. Okay. And then I think it's important to it's like I just finished up business school. All right. And, like the average, I was definitely in the older end. I think I started around 31 or something, graduated at 33. And the average age is somewhere around like 27, 28 or something like that. Which is like, you're close enough. And I think at that point, like the gap in between, 27-year-old and a 30-year-old isn't that much really. But it is kind of, I think it's a much larger gap between like a 26-year-old and a 22-year-old in law school, especially when, you probably just got back from, a tour in Afghanistan or something. And like your mindset's very different. And it is important to kind of think through those types of social dynamics, whether it be, whether you're planning to go to grad school or a job or whatever afterwards, just understanding like, how's this really gonna look for me? And like, how am I going to interact with the other people that I'm around in here? And I don't think necessarily that should, stop you from doing anything, but I think it's just a good thing to kind of think about and be cognizant of in that next move after the military.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, so first, definitely take the time off. It's really important to decompress and give yourself some space. Ideally, you have terminal leave, so you're getting paid as you're decompressing. The age thing is definitely important, and so is the life experience. No matter even at business school, you might be closer in age, but the life experience is pretty different, and so it's worth thinking in advance of how you're going to handle people who just they don't have the same worldview or perspective, given the experiences they've had. A lot of them probably have never left the country, let alone serve in a combat zone. So I think that's all important to walk into. I think the other thing veterans should know coming out of the service is that people will hold them in extremely high respect, even if they don't necessarily show it. So again, like chip on my shoulder first year, and I was like broody all the time, and didn't really talk in class at all. didn't make an effort to like socialize with people that much. And there was one exercise that was done. It's called um, uh, the influence line, where students actually had to like rank in order who was most influential, and it was a way to try to figure out like interpersonal dynamics and teach people about perceptions of influence and that kind of thing. And again, I assumed I'd be like somewhere in the middle of the pack because I never talked. I don't know what influence I could have, and I was ranked almost consistently number one. And I think it was purely virtue of the military background that people assumed, maybe I was quiet, but there's a depth of experience. There's a certain kind of training I went through that just set me apart from everybody. And I think that's going to be true for every veteran who gets out. And so, regardless of whether people like say it or not, they will be viewed as more influential, more credible. They'll have a level of respect afforded just by virtue of their service. And it's something it's just something to know, because whether people are showing it or not, that's what you have. And veterans should be confident that their experience is really valued wherever they go, and people will treat them differently as a result.
Yeah, yeah. I very much experienced something similar. I would often notice in class when the question came to, okay, if the professor asked something about how do I put together this Excel model, like they're definitely not going to look at me based off my based off my grades in those classes. But in general, it's like, okay, we're going to go talk to Eric over here, who just came from private equity or something, right? When it starts talking about like leadership, ethics, super kind of fungible stuff like that, I would start noticing heads turning towards like me and the other veterans in the room. Like, this is kind of where we need you guys to speak up, because like we want your experience and like your yeah, like we want your experience in this conversation right now. It kind of starts to even out towards the end, but I think especially at the start of school, I noticed that a lot. Like people were like, okay, I know Mark was in the Army. I kind of want your opinion on this thing. Definitely stands out. So I know, in our initial conversation, and I want to kind of like find how this connection started to happen for you while you were at law school. But I know after graduation, you went on a big road trip. And then like that road trip kind of resulted into a book, right? Can you talk through like the evolution of how that started coming together, like while you were at Yale?
Yeah. So again, that first year, I felt a little missionless. Like I didn't really have anything to wake up for in the morning besides like not getting absent in class. And I felt that lack of purpose a lot. And this was now 2014, 2015. Black Lives Matter kind of broke out, and there was a lot of dissension in the country. It felt like the country just felt like it was sort of coming apart. Then we head into 2016 with Trump, and it just gets even worse. And I think it's no secret that Yale Law School and Yale University generally is like a hotbed of progressive activism. And it felt painful to me to hear so many people talking badly about the country when I had just served in uniform and had friends still serving in uniform and overseas. And around that time, I had made a friend at law school. He was straight out of the State Department, grew up in Berkeley, very hippie, liberal, progressive. And I'm a Republican Marine. And after a full year of just nonstop debates on campus, we decided we needed to get away, and we took a road trip across the country. And out on the road, you see the country differently. You get to meet people in their hometowns. You sit down with them over dinner. You see the landscape of America, and it's hard not to fall in love with it. It's such a beautiful country, and all the noise around politics and whatever else is going on just quiets down. And so we felt like it was such an important experience. We wanted other people to get that perspective. And so without any real agenda, we started doing more road trips and just meeting more people, and eventually decided, we really think there's a story here. Like while the whole country is sort of convulsing under this Trump Hillary, battle, or is America racist or not? It just seems so fractious at the national level. But on the ground, what we were seeing across the country was very different. It was a more complex picture, and all the things that I believed from my time in the military and what Chris believed through, his childhood, his upbringing, his time in the State Department. We were finding a way to talk about these problems that the country faced in a much calmer, reasonable way. And so we decided to write a book. And so we put together a couple chapters just on our own. And one thing led to another. And we ended up getting a book deal. And our book came out in 2020. It's called Union, Democrat or Republican in a Search for Common Ground. And, July 2020, where the country was going through George Floyd protests and the 2020 election was a pretty hard time to be out on the road talking about bipartisanship and common ground. But it meant a lot to me. And that book became, in a sense, like my mission post-military, like trying to convince the country of what is still great about America, why we are not as divided as people think, and all the deep ties that bind us at the local level and the values we hold in common. So that was my book experience.
Fascinating. I'm super curious. Like you said, you all were, driving around, talking to people and everything. Were you like deliberately seeking people out to like have conversations like this? Or was it just like, I'm in a local diner and I don't know, we start chatting up the waitress or something like that? Like, you talk through like kind of like how those conversations were happening.
The first 3 road trips were all serendipitous. We met people, they invited us to stay with. So we met a bunch of veterans in this little town in Arizona, and they invited us to have a barbecue with them. And one of their younger nephews was enlisting into the Army that night. So, that was like a serendipitous experience that we never could have planned. And the whole first 3 road trips were all that. The second 3, we now had a book deal, and we knew exactly the kind of stories about America we wanted to find. So, for instance, we wanted to go to Detroit because Detroit is this incredible story of the second richest city in America at one point, with all this wealth from the auto industry, and now it's in total despair. Like it's gone from 2 million people to 700,000, and they're whole empty blocks. And yet there's some stories of like a renaissance happening and manufacturing coming back, and some revitalization in the core. And so we wanted to like go tell that story. And so we planned out a trip, and we had some people we wanted to meet. We wanted to meet someone from like who had come out of prison and was like trying to get back on their feet. And we wanted to meet people who were trying to do like new urban development. And so we would find those people to talk to them. And the second half of the book is that sort of more deliberate search for parts of America that we thought told this incredible story. And so we went to like Tulsa, New Orleans, Detroit, Alabama, doing that kind of more directed search.
I'm curious to, at first glance, like you and your co-author here, I mean, about polar opposites in like background and it sounds like political beliefs and everything too. How did you all like learn to communicate with each other and like understand each other and like your differences of values and opinions, and be able to like, tolerate being in a car with a person who's like, completely different than you, at least like politically wise for, weeks at a time. Like, because I think that I hear people that struggle with this all the time of, I have, these entrenched beliefs and values and someone else doesn't, and I don't even know how to like talk to them anywhere. And it sounds like you two were able to come to some type of middle ground. And I'd be curious to know like what helped you in doing that from kind of like both sides of the equation.
Yeah, for sure. So at the beginning, like we fought all the time, and there were a couple fights where we almost were like, all right, enough of these trips. Like I can't stand being with you anymore. And we were able to kind of get past that. And I think there were a couple things that helped us get past it. The first was just time together. Like you experience this in the military. Initially you might hate people in your platoon. You can't stand them, but then you go through a tour together, and no matter what else, like you have a bond, and you've gone through missions, and you have something to fall back on where there's a level of trust. And over a series of road trips, we just built that trust together. And as we knew each other, we knew each other's families, we became uh, uh, bound by like the experiences we had. It was much easier to say like, okay, like he said something I find horrible, but like I know there's something behind it. And so that level of trust helped. I think the next thing that was probably the most important was eventually we got to the point where we stopped seeing each other as like Republican or Democrat, and we learned to see each other from like the identity that actually mattered. Like, I don't care that I'm a Republican. I don't like wear it on my chest. It's not who it's not who I see myself as. I do see myself as a Marine veteran. And so when Chris could look at me as a Marine veteran instead of a Republican, it was much easier to understand why I got so angry when he said like America has systemic racism. And because that was a direct attack on my identity. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I want the flag to mean something special. And anytime it's attacked, I'm going to react. And, you know, vice versa. So Chris, his profession was journalism. And so, you know, when I would say something, he would often respond like, I don't know if that's true. I want to go see it for myself and understand the facts. And I would get angry that he wouldn't just sort of like take my word for it. But, you know, slowly I got to understand his perspective of like, I actually want to see things on the ground. I want to tell it like it is. And I'm not going to believe you until I see it for myself. And so getting to that point where we can understand each other's like deeper identity, what really mattered to us, allowed us to have a richer discussion, because, you know, it's way more interesting to argue as like Marine journalist than it is to argue as like Republican Democrat. And there's nothing unique there. There's nothing about us as individuals. So I think that became really important. And then, you know, once we did that, what we found was we actually weren't all that far apart on most things. Like, we always wanted the same end goal. We want, you know, America to be a vibrant democracy where everyone has equal opportunity and fair shot at achieving the American dream. And the only areas we disagreed were on how to get there. And that's okay, because that's a policy disagreement. It's a method disagreement. It's not like a worldview disagreement. And we found that was true on almost every issue. And the final piece was, you know, we really had to like enforce this as a rule that we were not going to talk about people. So we're not going to talk about Donald Trump or Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer or Mitch McConnell, because you're just going to get into like a tit for tat, who did the worst behavior. And all politicians have bad behavior. Like, they're all terrible. They're all lying all the time. They're all like, you know, saying whatever they need to in order to win. And they're playing political games all the time. And so if the conversation ever went there, we just stopped, because it's never productive. And I still have this all the time. I have it with my family. I have it with friends where they want to, you know, challenge me on like, well, how could you stand by Republicans when they did X, Y, Z? And it's like, I'm not going to play that game, because both sides do it. It's all terrible. And we can all admit that.
I think those are some really, really good rules. And I very much agree with you on the aspect of sometimes on the surface level, it appears like two different people might have completely different views. But when you start getting to like the underlying values, then you realize they're actually way more similar than you might think. It's just it's a difference in how we want to go about getting there. But at the end of the day, like, both people want the same thing. And I think like that's like the really important thing to remember, understand, and like see in somebody else, that like they want the same thing. It may not have the exact same flavor that you do. It may, they have a different strategy in how they want to get there or whatever, or maybe a different timeline too. But nonetheless, like, they want the same thing you do. Okay, and I think it's a really good rule. And I think it's a very good tactical rule too. On the like, let's just not talk about individuals, because yeah, I mean, we can sit here and say, everyone can pull up 10 different stories about 10 different politicians and, oh, they did this and they did that, blah, 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 blah. At the end of the day, like, an individual politician does not represent, my values and beliefs. They are, a person who got put into that position through a whole kind of shitstorm of random things in some ways, it feels like. But nonetheless, like, they are not me. I am me. And like, they're just the person who's also them in that situation, representing what they are trying to do.
Yeah, so I think that's exactly right. And the final thing that I think the road trips across the country did for both of us from both sides was just give us a little bit more humility about our views. I thought I knew a lot about America just because of my time in the military, and I thought I read a lot, and I thought I knew things. And then when you get somewhere on the ground, like, you get a deeper, more complex perspective. I think everyone who deployed overseas knows that. Whatever we thought we knew going into an area, as soon as you get on the ground, it's so much more complex. And that humility also really helped us, because it made us less confident in our own views in a good way. So we're not like just ramming whatever preconceived notion we had down on the other person. We could step back and say, like, okay, well, there's probably a lot I don't know, and I'd like to hear more before I challenge you. And so that humility is really helpful. And again, I think for veterans, it's also helpful to know that, like, people don't have the same experience as you. They don't have the same depth of understanding of everything from like what it's like to live in Afghanistan to what it means to train for combat. And that lack of experience means that they're operating on half information or even way less. And so rather than get angry, it's approach it with some humility to learn, like, okay, what do they know that I don't know? But then also, how do I help them see some things that I've learned? And the only way to do that is to approach it in a respectful, calm manner. And so that means staying away from those more divisive engagements. And if you find that someone's not in that same mode as you, just walk away. It's not worth it to argue with someone.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Jordan, I feel like we could probably spend hours talking about like just this whole topic and everything right now. But I do want to leave space and time for everything else. But before we kind of shift the conversation though, just so we kind of understand like the mechanics of how like a book deal happens, could you kind of walk through if someone's like, I might try and want to do that one day? Like, how does that get going? Like, what does that kind of look like as a aspiring author?
Yeah. So basically there's two pathways to publish a book. You can self-publish, or you can try to get a book deal from one of the publishing houses. The first pathway is obviously the easiest. You might even end up making more money that way, and it's fairly simple. Like in that case, you just you write the book, you design the cover, and then you publish it on Amazon self-publishing. So that's a very easy pathway. What I would say is the really nice thing about writing a book is that it gives you credibility. Whatever you do after that, you get to say like author of X, and you'll get invited to speak places. It is a credibility boost, and I've been surprised by how true that is. The second pathway you can go is to try to get a publishing deal. It's pretty hard and pretty rare. Essentially, what you need to do is write out essentially like a 6-page summary of the book. And it goes from like, what the topic is, why people would want to read it, what your credibility is in writing it, and who you think the audience is and why they would buy it. Then you take that and you go get an agent. So you send it to a bunch of agents. They'll take meetings, they'll interview you. And if they think they can sell your book, they will then sign you as a client. And then once you sign, you then have to write almost like 100-page book proposal. It's almost as big as the book itself. And it just flushes all that stuff out in much more detail and has summaries by chapter. And that book proposal goes off to the publishing houses. And often there's like essentially an auction for your book. And so they'll bid on it. They'll say like, we'll give you $20,000 or $40,000 as an advance to publish your book. And with your agent, you'll then choose one of those. And it comes with an advance, which is great. It's like a check up front. And then the publishing house gives you an editor, and they will then work with you to create the book, and then they'll manage the book launch. And so, it's definitely better in the sense that you get an upfront check, and you also get the help of the publishing house and their credibility to do the book launch. The reality is very few books actually make money. And so it's very, very hard to make a lot of money, especially that latter option. People usually do it because it's like it's viewed as more credible as a book. But if what you're really going for is like building your audience, building your niche, expertise on something, this self-publishing route is probably the best way to go.
Fascinating. I honestly did not know that whole process. I mean, I knew like on the very end, putting together a book proposal, but like all kind of the mechanics and everything in between. That was super informative. So thank you for that. That was super helpful. I learned a ton of that. Well, cool, man. So I kind of want to shift the conversation to like what you went into next, right? So like you finished up the kind of the whole book projects, and then you went into like also, a pretty exciting thing afterward. Can you talk about like, what that was and how you got into that?
Yeah, definitely. So while I was in grad school, I basically was looking for stuff to do outside of class. I was at this point, I was like 31. I wanted to be working. I didn't want to be sitting in a classroom. And so I started finding kind of all these people who'd give me jobs that I could do on the side. And while I was doing that, I met this this guy, his name was Eric Braverman. He was teaching a class at Yale, and had been a McKinsey partner, super interesting guy. And he and I started working on something around training people how to be ethical leaders. And we ended up creating a course on it at Yale, using a lot of my military experience and his experience from McKinsey. And while we were doing that, Eric Schmidt, the former Google CEO, hired him to come set up a new foundation and policy organization for Eric. That would sort of be his next platform post Google. And Eric Braverman asked me to come build it with him. And so, while I was still in school, I started working on that part-time, and then eventually full-time after school. And so, basically what we were trying to do is use the platform that Eric had as a person, and the wealth that he had made from Google, to try to make the world better, and especially to make America better. And it became this awesome opportunity to create something from scratch that I thought could have a big impact on all the issues I cared about. So on national security, on American jobs, on pushing scientific frontiers forward, and doing so with the backing of very well-funded organization. So I went to go do that, and great experience. I did it for about 5 years. During that time, Eric was selected to lead the Defense Innovation Board and to run the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. So I got to learn a lot about both defense technology and broader American technology, and how that intersects with national security, which has now become sort of the main thing I work on today. So fantastic experience. And just to kind of like extract some ideas or lessons from that, the whole reason I became close with Eric Braverman initially is one, I was just kind of exploring and taking initiative to go meet people. I sent him a cold email and just said, "Hey, I think your experience is interesting. Would love to, sit down and talk about it." And he and I met and hit it off. And so we ended up working on that course together. And so that initiative really helped. The next thing was, I think when you come out of the military or grad school, you kind of have one of two choices for how you choose your next step. I think one of those choices is to optimize for skill building. And if you're doing that, go to somewhere that trains you well. Go to like McKinsey, go to Goldman Sachs, go to anything with a training program where in a condensed period of time, they will make you an expert at what they do. And it'll set you off on a career path that uses that training. The other is to do something like unique, off the wall, with high risk and high return. And that's what I did. There was no training involved. It was going to be like me and two other people. And, I wasn't sure what it was going to become. It could become nothing, but it was also high return in the sense that, it put me in a position where if this worked, I'd get to work on all the things I cared about with a well-funded org, with one of the most prominent people in America. And so I took that path. Had I not, I probably would have gone the skill building path. And I think both are great. The key is like knowing which one you're doing, because they have different risks and rewards attached to it. So, that was sort of the big takeaway I had from that experience.
I've never heard it kind of put that way, but I think there's a lot of really good value in viewing it in that way, of like the skill building, or I kind of want to go carve my own path out, and it may not work. And I'm personally on the I'm gonna go carve my own path out route right now. Okay. And the way I've always looked at it is like, if this falls through, then guess what? Like the skill building route is still there, and I can shift gears and head over to there. Right. Like you graduated from Yale Law School. Okay. If the Schmidt Foundation starts collapsing, great. I'm sure there's plenty of, big law firms out there that are looking out there for you, and you can go and kind of shift gears into that skill building path. Right. And like that was, I think it's a good way to view the different options, and also thinking about the risk that's out there. Very much the way I've viewed my route is like, okay, guess what? At the end of the day, like I still got like a Dart MBA, like people that's still valuable out there. People are still going to hire me. If I completely fucked up this whole thing and like fall flat on my face, guess what? It's not the end of the world. And like I can shift gears and go do something else. And I think it's also a question and like where you are as an individual at that time of like, okay, do I feel comfortable doing this, or do I really just kind of want to go build some skills right now and then maybe take that other path later down the road. But I think it's a really good way to just think of it quite like that versus um, I think sometimes maybe like the skill building path can feel like, well, this is like just kind of like what I have to go do because like everyone's kind of telling me I have to go do this thing. But if you view it as, listen, like this is just kind of my skill building thing for 2 to 3 years, or even like 4, 5, 6 years, whatever, to then go do the next thing. I think that's a really healthy way to look at it. And so I like that dichotomy you presented in that way. Could you talk a bit? I mean, like what did you learn about like creating a new foundation like this? I mean, you were there like in the start, in the ground of it. It's like, what did you learn in like creating something like this? Which it seems like there were, you know, it sounded like Eric Schmidt had some kind of, some idea of a vision or some goals that he wanted to achieve, but it sounded also like it's kind of up to you all to figure out like what exactly it is that we want to do. Can you kind of talk through like those early days process of getting this thing off the ground?
Yeah. So Eric had some leadership principles from his career at Google, and before that, he's an incredible executive, and so he kind of set out his intent, but his strategy, which he writes about in his book, how Google works, is essentially go hire the best people, like hire the smartest people, give them the intent, and then let them figure it out. It's also very similar to what we do in the military. Um, so he kind of empowered us to say, go figure this out. Like tell me how you think we can have the biggest impact. And so for the first year, we really we kind of iterated. We did a lot of interviews. We talked to a lot of people. We got ideas. We came up with our own ideas, and we tested them very small just to see what worked, what didn't work, until we found things that we thought actually had traction and could build upon. So that first year, we kind of used that principle. The other thing Eric was clear on from the beginning was he wanted things that scaled. It had to be able to have scale from the beginning, and he always wanted to do things with partners. Not because there's any necessarily intrinsic value of having partners, but it does mean that you have to have really good ideas to convince other people to work with you. And so it's a signal of like, this is a smart idea. And so that became sort of the early principles we started on. Now, the early team all had different interests. You know, some people were very interested in science. Some were very interested in, I was very interested in workforce issues and how Americans can get better jobs. I was also interested in national security. And so, we tried to build out portfolio areas. And the way we did it was we would start by kind of identifying the problem. Like what is a barrier or what is an issue that is preventing progress on this thing we care about that neither the government nor the private sector are solving. And that became like our window that we would work in. And then once we did that, we did what I call the walk around. Like you go talk to every expert in that field. It's easy to find them because they tend to be well known or published in that area. But what's interesting is when you talk to them and you push several layers of like, who's working on the most interesting thing? What are the ideas that if they worked could be dramatically groundbreaking in this area? And as you do that, more and more people point you towards like a single person or a single idea. And that is when you realize like, oh, here's where like the real opportunity is. This is a big bet if this works. And that's what we started to focus on. And so I think that process of identifying like where's like the real, insight or the brilliant person that could make a difference, that essentially became our model. And then once you find them, what we would do is we would start small. We would test them and we would give them a little bit of money and say like, okay, like show us what you can do with this. And if they were able to use that and raise a bunch more money and hire some people and get some traction, then we're like, okay, this person's got legs. Like we could bet on them. And then we'd go big and we'd give, a lot of capital support, et cetera, to scale whatever that person was working on. And that really became our model. And that allowed us to get some like wins early without any big press, without having to make any big moves, so that we built up our model. We knew what we were doing, and we can now just like iterate it in more areas. So that's kind of how we built it from the ground up.
I talk all the time on this show, like whenever I'm interviewing entrepreneurs about starting new businesses or creating new products or something, at some point there's always the like customer discovery process of like talking to people, like what are your problems and like how can I build something that's going to solve your problem? And we may not think that like that same type of process goes into, like a foundation, but it does. Like you kind of go out there, you figure out like, oh, okay, what are the problems? What it's like a realistic solution we can provide here, and then kind of how do we scale this to grow it? It's like the same kind of thought process, and I think it's just really important to understand like at the end of the day, like whatever problem you're trying to solve, like you need to talk to other people who are like dealing with this problem to determine like how do I create a solution to address it, whether it be a new business or a product or applying money to a nonprofit to help them address a challenge in society or the economy or whatever it is. I think it's just a good way to view any type of problem framing.
Yeah, for sure. And
Yeah.
I think it works for pretty much anything you do. I think having the end in mind, like where do you want this thing to be once once you've achieved whatever it is you want to achieve, having that end in mind, but being very agnostic on how you get there and saying like, okay, we're going to iterate, we're going to figure it out. And, maybe over time that end will end up changing or being slightly different. But that combination of like end in mind plus iteration and getting feedback, getting customer discovery, getting, seeing results before you fall in love with the idea or theory, definitely the way to go.
Awesome. We could spend, I think, probably hours talking together right now. I mean, so much good stuff I want to get into, but we are down to like last 10 minutes or so. And I do want to leave time to talk about America's Frontier Fund, because this is talk about what it is and then kind of the evolution of how it got started.
Yeah. So America's Frontier Fund is a new organization that I launched about 8-9 months ago. Our vision for this is that it can become kind of like the next DARPA, like the organization that shepherds America through this next 20 years as we enter into a tech race with China and potentially a Cold War with China. And the problem that we started with is that the United States has offshored all of its advanced manufacturing capabilities overseas, mostly to Asia. So we cannot produce a advanced chip today on American shores. Most of the fabrication for semiconductors, for any kind of processing of rare earth minerals, all that happens overseas. And that was sort of a conscious decision that was made, or not necessarily conscious, but for a lot of reasons that happened over the last 30 years. And it puts us in a position where in all the frontier technologies that we care about, we're actually behind overseas competitors because we don't have the manufacturing base. So we're behind in semiconductors, we're behind in quantum computing, we're behind in nuclear, fusion power, and that's a huge challenge because technology has always been America's advantage. We have an incredible military, but our military is as good as it is because we have the best technology, and that's true in a variety of dimensions of our economy. And so, if we lose the next tech race for quantum computing, for artificial intelligence, the United States loses its global position. We will no longer be the dominant power on Earth. And China has directed $1 trillion into those areas to win. They have a full national plan to make sure they win. In the US, we don't have that. We don't have an innovation strategy. We don't have the ability to coordinate between the government and the private sector to make sure that our technology wins. And so we view that as an existential risk for the United States. And what America's Frontier Fund is designed to do is bring the best investors, scientists, and national security policymakers together on one team under an umbrella structure to determine where is there risk to the United States in losing a given technology, where's there opportunity for us to leapfrog, to like get ahead through disruptive technology into the next generation, and what investments have to be made today in order to make sure that we win over the next 10 to 20 years. And then what we do with that insight is we feed it back to the government. We inform policy. We go, we talk to the Department of Defense and Commerce and Energy. We talk to Congress and the National Security Council, and we show them like, these are the areas that if we do not win, we have existential risk for the country. And then we feed that information to private investors. We show people with what we call like trusted capital. We know they don't have Chinese or Russian money. hey, here's the biggest opportunities for disruptive technology. Here are the best teams. Here's why it's going to win, and have huge end markets so that we can crowd it in private investment. And then lastly, we've built this great team, great asset. We can raise our own money. So we're raising our own private funds, similar to what any venture fund would do. So we can deploy capital into those areas ourselves. So it's not just like we're telling others this is the right bet. It's we're putting our own skin in the game and saying we believe this is what's vital for America and what's going to have great returns over time. So that's what America's Frontier Fund is. What we want it to be is essentially like a sovereign wealth fund for America, dedicated to keeping it at the leading edge of technology.
I love everything about that, man. And I think like that, everything you just talked about is going to resonate super well with this audience and hearing what you all are trying to build. I'm curious. Just like I was trying to think like the mechanics of things, because I think your setup is a nonprofit, right? Like how does that kind of affect like raising your own fund and investing those dollars? That's just like a general question. I'm honestly not sure about.
So this is where the law school, the law degree actually helped. So what we've done is we've created a 501c3 parent organization. It's sort of like the umbrella. And in that we can raise donations like any nonprofit to fund all of our team, our operations. We've gotten some great donors behind us to fund that. A nonprofit can own a for-profit. So a nonprofit organization is able to own a for-profit where the distributions from the for-profit go back to the nonprofit. So what we can do is under the nonprofit, create subsidiary investment funds. They're a normal venture fund structure with like a general partnership, which is the nonprofit, and then LPs who put money in. And we invest that capital. As we generate returns, we distribute the returns back to the limited partners. But then anything we make goes up to the nonprofit, and we can reinvest it into new funds, new technologies, new capabilities. And so that's the structure. And everything the funds invest in conform to our nonprofit's mission, because the mission is to advance U.S. tech leadership.
Yeah, I mean, you're not there investing in the next new coffee or juice or whatever, right? Yeah. Okay, cool. That was super helpful. I was just kind of curious, like the mechanics of how that works and the structure and everything. So that's super informative. Jordan, this has been an awesome conversation, man. We've talked about so much good stuff. You're such an interesting cat, and we do got to end the show here in a few minutes. I'll be respectful of your time. You're with family right now too. So in a minute, I'm going to pass it back over to you, just providing last thoughts, words of wisdom to the crowd. Before we do, though, I always have a question I ask all my guests. Okay, and that's: you think back to your time in the Marines. What was the best and or worst chow hall you ever ate
at? So, man, that's a good question. Best chow hall was probably in Djibouti. Camp Lemonnier, man, they've got good food there. Worst food was probably I forget the name, but wherever we do our pre-deployment training out in the desert, 29 Palms. I forget the name of the camp, but man, that food was terrible. The other bad one was probably OCS. OCS is terrible food. Doesn't matter because you have like 3 minutes to eat it.
Right. Well, fascinating, man. Okay, cool. So I want to give it back over to you. Just final shots you want to give out to this crowd as they're either, looking down, like, their exit from the military, or maybe, they've gotten out in the last 12 to 18 months. And, are just looking for a little bit of guidance and thoughts from somebody who's been out for a couple of years now.
Yeah, for sure. So if people are still in, but going to transition, I just say start early, start thinking early, come up with a plan, know that the plan won't survive first contact, but, having a plan is super helpful. If you're for both in or out, just use the veteran network. I think veteran networks are so powerful. Almost every big company today has one. So Goldman Sachs, McKinsey, they all have veterans groups, and they're always willing to help. And so all you have to do is reach out, take some initiative, send cold emails, and they will help you. And that'll be the greatest support you have for whatever you do next. And veterans, in my experience, they're always willing to help. And so you should use it, because every single person who comes out of the military has something important to offer, whether it's their own business they want to create, a company they go to, or some other kind of service to the country. And so make sure that you take advantage of the veteran network to keep doing that.
I echo that sentiment all the time. Yeah, the vet net is real and it is powerful. And when you reach out to people, like they just want to help. They really do. Okay. Like I always kind of say, like, maybe I'm gonna give someone shit a couple for, the first minute because they're a Marine or they're Air Force or whatever, right? And like they're gonna give it back to me for being like a dumb Army grunt. But at the end of the day, within like after we get over, that initial back and forth, cool, man, how can I help you out? Let's make each other better and work through this thing together. It is a deep and it is a powerful network for sure.
For sure.
Well, Jordan, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. Really appreciate your time. Ton of good stuff in here for the audience. So really like that. And for everyone listening, really appreciate you tuning in today. If you're enjoying this, please like, subscribe, leave a review, and share with a friend. This one is also going to be posted on YouTube. I have not been super good about getting podcasts up on YouTube, but starting to do more video as well. So if that's your preferred medium, you might want to check that one out. Jordan, thanks for coming on. Appreciate your time. Enjoy your weekend. All right.
You too, Mark. Thanks so much.